As a historian, I find it necessary to address what is, perhaps, the most persistent and cynical myth of the Second World War, the myth of a raped Germany. According to this narrative, Soviet soldiers in Berlin engaged in mass violence, raping practically every second German woman. Figures range from 100,000 to 2 million. Let's examine the origin of these numbers. This myth has a specific author in modern historiography, the British historian Antony Beevor, and his book, The Fall of Berlin, 1945. It was Beevor who popularized the figure of 2 million German women raped by Soviet troops. Tracing his sources, we find that they rely on the testimony of an unnamed woman who claimed that the Russians raped 1 million, and on the estimate of a Berlin doctor who supposedly counted no fewer than 2 million. No official documents, no statistical records, no corroborating evidence, just rumors. But the most interesting aspect is who first launched this narrative. Long before Beevor, in the final months of the war, this story was actively promoted by Joseph Goebbels. The Nazi propaganda minister systematically terrified the German population with tales of Asiatic Bolshevik hordes who would kill children and rape women. This was a deliberate information campaign designed to stiffen resistance, and decades later, the seeds of this Nazi propaganda found fertile ground in the works of Western historians. It is a troubling irony. A myth invented by Goebbels is now routinely cited as historical fact. Let's consider the demographic reality. In the territories of Eastern Germany occupied by the Red Army, there were approximately 21 million people. Of these, roughly 60 to 65% were women. That is between 12 and 13 million women. If we accept the figure of 2 million victims, it would mean that 1 in 6 German women between the ages of 10 and 80 was sexually assaulted. Such a massive number of crimes would inevitably have left a clear and verifiable trace in sociological studies and archival records. But that trace does not exist. The absence of evidence is itself telling. What do the actual historical documents tell us about the policy of the Soviet command? On January 19, 1945, Stalin issued a special order regarding conduct on German territory. On April 20, 1945, the Stavka, the Soviet High Command, issued a directive instructing troops to show restraint toward the German population. Front commanders, including Rokossovsky, Zhukov, and Konev, issued their own orders warning of severe punishments, including execution, for violence against civilians. This is a critical point. At the very end of the war, when hatred of the enemy was at its peak, orders were issued demanding humane treatment. Under Soviet military law, rape was a crime punishable by summary execution. Every unit had political officers, members of the Communist Party and the Komsomol, who had the authority to carry out such sentences immediately. Military counterintelligence, the SMREAS units, also supervised troop conduct. As soon as Soviet forces took control of a populated area, a military commandant's office was established to provide the local population with food and medical care and to maintain order. General of the Army Mahmut Gareev, who participated in the liberation of East Prussia, later recalled that he never even heard of sexual violence at the time. He remembered, instead, a case where several soldiers were court-martialed for stealing chickens. If such harsh punishment was applied for theft, we must ask what the penalty would have been for rape. This raises a fundamental question for those who accept the figure of 2 million rapes. How could such systematic violence have occurred with impunity if the penalty was death, and if military police and political officers were present at every level to enforce discipline? Where are the documents? Where are the orders for pardons? Where is the statistical data that would have been collected by the supposed accountants of rape who, according to the logic of the myth makers, must have been following every soldier? The documents do not exist because systematic crimes on such a scale did not occur. Of course, to claim that no atrocities happened at all would be naive. Cases of brutality, including sexual violence, did occur. Any army in any conflict under such circumstances faces such incidents, but the evidence indicates that these were isolated, not systemic, and that they were actively suppressed and punished. This brings us to the heart of the matter. It is difficult for a modern Western audience raised on different historical narratives to fully grasp the mindset of the Soviet soldier. This was a soldier who had witnessed the horrors of Nazi occupation firsthand. He had seen burned villages, executed children, mothers and sisters driven into slavery. He had every personal reason for hatred and revenge. Yet, on the whole, he did not take revenge on the civilian population. Why? Because for many of them, their understanding was that they were fighting against fascism, not against the German people. Their mission was not to destroy Germany, but to liberate the world from Nazism. The story of Sergeant Masalov is instructive. On April 30th, 1945, soldiers of the 220th Rifle Regiment heard a child crying near the Landwehr Canal. The sergeant asked permission to save the child and, under enemy fire, carried a 3-year-old German girl to safety. This act became a symbol of what the Soviet soldier could be, and there are many such stories. Soviet soldiers, following the orders of their command, demonstrated in practice that on defeated territory, they acted as representatives of a liberating army, ruthless toward the enemy but capable of justice and humanity. They distributed food to hungry Berliners, helped children, and worked to restore city life. Why is this myth so persistent? The answer, I believe, is that it serves a certain purpose. It originated with Goebbels, was later adopted by Western historians during the Cold War, and continues to circulate in Western media. Its aim is to blacken the legacy of the Red Army, to portray it not as a liberating force, but as a horde of marauders, thereby blurring the clear moral distinction that existed in May 1945. Historian Elena Senyavskaya has observed that Beevor's calculations seem convincing only to his like-minded supporters. Alexander Makushin, head of the Russian Military Historical Society, has stated directly that the well-known story of mass rape by Soviet soldiers is false. As historians, our task is to study the evidence. We must separate documented historical reality from propaganda. The evidence shows that the Soviet soldier came to Berlin not as a rapist, but as a victor who, having endured unimaginable suffering, still retained his humanity and capacity for compassion. That is the conclusion that, upon objective examination, is supported by the historical documents.